Many of the founders of Long Now were proponents of the new technology that we now use as the internet. And we all thought that fundamentally that the more we connected people, the better things would be. And I think we're finally crossing a new threshold.
Yeah.
We're realizing that actually connecting people with totally no filters, and there's no newsrooms doing fact-checking and any of that, we have crossed, and strangely, a new set of people are saying, wow, actually, we're crossing into the people are yelling fire in the theater line of the First Amendment, right? And so that argument seems to have been, the fire in the theater argument always gets made with every new technology, and I'm just curious as to what you think of where we're at with this one, and where we may be at with the next ones, whether it's generative speech from computers, and if we just need to spend our time getting used to technologies and kind of call a truce during those times as we get used to them, or if we actually need to change the law and say you can't yell fire in the theater.
Yeah. So that's a really good and really complicated question. And in general, I'd like to call on the room to respond. But I'd also, I want to say I think that there's a couple things in there, which is one of the problems that, I think a lot of us are having with, or one of the problems that we're having, or the disillusionments we're having with the internet right now, right, is it didn't turn out as this kind of enlightenment project. It's turned out to be a hotbed of rumor and falsities and things like that, which has to do with the specific ideas and content. Where I would be interested in thinking about the fire in a theater question is really if we're thinking about when is the mode of communication on the internet something that might cross over into action or conduct, and is that action or conduct, when might that action or conduct be considered expression, when is it considered something that is just brute action or whatever, and how we might think through that. So if we can think through any examples where some of this does seem to be more material or to be somewhat different in its mode of communication or in its form, that would be really wonderful and useful. And does anybody else have anything to say? Because this is, I think, a compelling one.
We've got one right there.
Yeah.
Oh,
hey, we have a question. Our question is, in the age of live streaming of events and Facebook live streaming on multiple different platforms, do you consider, or would you consider that to be protected speech? If so, should it be regulated? And if so, who should be in charge of regulating that speech? Should it be the platforms themselves? Should they be government regulation?
So this is kind of like a doctrine question. So I think there's some lawyers in the room that could maybe field the actual doctrine a little bit better. Are you the lawyer in the room that can field the doctrine? Okay. Can you answer? Would you answer a little bit about?
Well, I actually wanted to hear your view on it because are we going to recognize the difference between an individual live streaming a murder, say in Cleveland, versus a protester live streaming police brutality at Standing Rock.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I think the public would recognize that there's a difference in those two medium, like the content of those two. But then, who should be responsible for determining what the public has access to and how? And are we going to recognize that as speech? And then, there's so many questions that kind of bridge.
So if we
that.
recognize that as speech, if we're going to make some kind of like blanket statement, like all live streaming is speech because it's just merely, the transmission over a distance of something that I'm saying or doing, which I don't know that we would do. That's a question for the lawyers. Then. We're saying there can be no rules, no rules from the government. Facebook can implement its own regulations of that, right? If we're saying this is all pure free speech, Facebook can have any kind of rule it wants about that because that's not covered by the First Amendment. But California can't create a law saying, any kind of live streaming should be subject to a 5-second delay or whatever kind of thing. Is that kind of where you're going?
Well, I'm putting it out there for people to think about because I think that there's definitely a public push to want to regulate
Yeah.
people's access, because we don't, like, the platforms themselves don't want to be seen as propagating violence. But at the same time, it's a very difficult
Yeah.
and nuanced question, because who should be doing the judging about what the public sees and what the public doesn't see?
And when do platforms want to be speakers, and when do they want to be mere platforms or conduits, which is a really interesting question. Like Facebook doesn't want to be a speaker, right? Or Facebook doesn't want to take on that kind of role.
I
Google
think
does.
there's another dimension that actually between both these comments that brings together maybe part of the other discussion. We're going from a broadcast era into a narrowcast era. So the crowded theater may not be very crowded. It may be a very insightful kind of speech. Actually, there's a case right now about a gentleman who's currently president who incited people in his crowd with just a public broadcast system. So it's interesting because you talk about the mass, and we're now into the narrows in an interesting way.
Yeah.
I mean, following up on Xander's question, there's another thing which I think has happened with the internet, maybe before that, but very much with the internet, and that is the anonymity of speech. It's one thing to say, you don't have freedom to say that. If I don't know who you are, I can't stop that. And so one of the real sort of complex problems of the internet is that as anonymity, real or assumed, seems to free people to do things and say things they wouldn't otherwise say. And there's actually almost no enforceability.
Yeah.
And so you could say, well, that's not allowed, but how do you stop it? Unless you try to control the broadcast media, who very aggressively try to say, hey, we're just the broadcast media. We're just the pipe.
Yeah.
So there's an accountability problem.
Yeah. And right, broadcasting isn't the media where that's happening,